The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the nearly empty restaurant as Staff Sergeant Maya Reyes wiped down the last table of her double shift. Her army uniform hung in her locker in the back. She changed into jeans and a faded blue t-shirt hours ago. At 34 years old, Maya had learned to compartmentalize her two lives. The decorated combat medic who'd served two tours in Afghanistan and the part-time waitress at Bernie's Diner in Cedar Falls, Virginia, trying to make ends meet. "Hey, soldier girl," Rick called from behind the counter, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You gonna finish mopping or you waiting for someone to salute you first?" Maya didn't look up. She'd been working at Bernie's for 6 months now, ever since her daughter Emma needed braces and the military salary didn't quite stretch far enough for a single mother. Rick was the owner's nephew, 23 years old, and he'd made it his personal mission to remind Maya that her service meant nothing in his diner. "Almost done," she said quietly, pushing the mop across the black and white tiles. "Almost doesn't cut it in the real world, ma'am," he sneered, emphasizing the last word mockingly. "See, in the army you just follow orders, out here you actually gotta work." Maya's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She needed this job. Emma's orthodontist appointments weren't going to pay for themselves, and her ex-husband Marcus had stopped sending child support 6 months ago. The Army Reserve pay helped, but it wasn't enough, not for a 13-year-old girl who was growing faster than Maya could keep up with. She finished mopping and grabbed her jacket from the hook by the kitchen. As she headed toward the door, Rick called out again. "Don't forget you're opening tomorrow, 6 a.m. sharp, and try to smile more. Customers don't tip when you look like you're about to cry." Maya paused at the door, her hand on the handle. She turned slowly, her dark eyes meeting his. "I'll be here." The night air hit her face as she stepped outside into the parking lot. It was nearly midnight and the small town of Cedar Falls was already asleep. Street lights cast orange pools of light across the empty sidewalks. Maya's beat-up Honda sat alone near the back of the lot. She climbed in, started the engine, and sat there for a moment, letting the day wash over her. Her phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Mom, when are you coming home? I need help with my history paper." Maya glanced at the clock. Midnight. Emma should have been asleep hours ago. "On my way, baby, be there in 10. She pulled out of the parking lot and headed down Main Street, past the hardware store and the post office, past the church where she and Emma sometimes went on Sundays when Maya wasn't too exhausted. Cedar Falls was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where your business became everyone's business, and where people had long memories. When Maya had first moved here 3 years ago, fresh from her second deployment, people had thanked her for her service. They'd shaken her hand at the grocery store, offered her discounts at the gas station. But that goodwill had faded. Now when people saw her in her waitress uniform or heard she was working 2 jobs, they whispered. They wondered why a decorated veteran couldn't make it work. They assumed she'd made bad choices, wasted her military benefits, maybe had problems they didn't know about. The truth was simpler and more painful. Life was expensive, her daughter deserved a good life, and pride didn't pay the bills. Maya pulled into the driveway of her small rental house on Maple Street. The porch light was on and she could see Emma's silhouette in the upstairs window. Her daughter, tall for 13, with Maya's dark hair and her father's light eyes, was still awake, still waiting. Maya unlocked the front door and climbed the stairs. Emma sat at her desk, surrounded by textbooks and notebook paper, her face tired but determined. "Hey, sweetie," Maya said softly, "it's late." "I know, but this paper's due tomorrow and I don't understand the Revolutionary War stuff." Emma looked up at her mother and Maya saw the worry there. The same worry she saw every time Emma looked at her lately, the fear that her mom was working too hard, wearing herself too thin. Maya sat on the edge of Emma's bed and pulled the textbook toward her. "All right, let's figure this out together." They worked for the next hour, Maya explaining battles and dates and the reasons men fought wars, all while her own body screamed for sleep. Finally, Emma's paper was done and Maya tucked her daughter into bed. "Mom," Emma said as Maya turned off the light. "Yeah, baby. Are you okay?" Maya paused in the doorway, such a simple question, such a complicated answer. "I'm fine, Em, get some sleep." But as Maya lay in her own bed 20 minutes later staring at the ceiling, she knew the truth. She was tired, bone deep, soul tired, and tomorrow she'd wake up at 5 and do it all over again. The morning shift at Bernie's started badly and got worse. Maya arrived at 5:45, unlocked the diner and began the opening routine. Start the coffee, fire up the grill, prep the stations. By 6:15, the early crowd had started trickling in, construction workers grabbing breakfast before their shifts, retirees who'd been coming to Bernie's for 30 years. Rick showed up at 7, 30 minutes late and smelling like beer. "Morning, soldier girl," he said, walking past her without washing his hands before heading to the grill. Maya bit her tongue and kept working. She took orders, poured coffee, delivered plates of eggs and bacon with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The customers were kind enough, most of them. Old Mr. Patterson left her a $5 tip on a $12 check. Mrs. Chen asked about Emma and told Maya she was doing a wonderful job raising her daughter alone. But then the Hendersons came in. Dale Henderson owned the car dealership on Route 29. His wife, Patricia, ran the Cedar Falls Ladies Auxiliary. They were in their mid-50s, well-dressed, and they knew everyone who mattered in town. They slid into a booth near the window and Maya grabbed 2 menus. "Good morning," she said pleasantly, "coffee to start." Dale looked up at her, recognition flickering across his face. Well, Maya Reyes heard you were working here now." There was something in his tone that made Maya's spine stiffen. "Yes, sir, coffee." Sure, he waved a hand dismissively. "You know, Patricia and I were just talking about you the other day, weren't we, honey?" Patricia looked uncomfortable. "Dale." "We were saying how it's such a shame," Dale continued, leaning back in the booth. "I mean, you serve your country, come back home, and end up slinging hash at a diner. Makes you wonder what happened, you know, bad decisions, maybe, spending problems." Maya's hands tightened on the menus. "I'll get your coffee." She turned away, her face burning. Behind her, she heard Dale's voice carry across the diner. "I'm just saying the military gives these people every advantage. Benefits, education, training. If they can't make it work after that, well, whose fault is that?" Maya poured their coffee with shaking hands. She wanted to tell him that she'd saved lives in Kandahar, that she'd held together a field hospital during a rocket attack, that she'd earned a Bronze Star for pulling 3 wounded soldiers from a burning Humvee. She wanted to tell him that she was working at this diner because she was a good mother who put her daughter first, not because she'd failed at anything. But she said nothing. She delivered the coffee, took their order, and walked away. The shift dragged on. By 2 p.m., Maya's feet ached and her head throbbed. She'd been awake for 9 hours and had another shift at the hospital starting at 4. She'd picked up work as a medical records clerk 3 nights a week, using her combat medic experience to at least work in healthcare. She was refilling the sugar dispensers when Rick approached her, his face twisted in annoyance. "Table 6 says their eggs were cold," he said. Maya looked over at table 6, the Hendersons, of course. "I'll take care of it." "You better, and Maya." Rick stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Dale Henderson is friends with my uncle. He says you've got an attitude problem, says you're acting like you're better than everyone because you were in the army." Maya stared at him. "I never said." "I don't care what you said, I care what he thinks, and right now he thinks you're trouble." Rick crossed his arms. "One more complaint and you're done here, got it?" Maya nodded slowly. "Got it." She walked to table 6, her pride crumbling with every step. "I apologize for the eggs," she said quietly. "Let me bring you fresh ones." Dale smirked. "See, was that so hard? Little humility goes a long way, young lady." Maya took the plates back to the kitchen. Her hands trembling, she scraped the barely touched eggs into the trash and prepared new ones, her mind screaming with all the things she wanted to say but couldn't. When her shift finally ended at 3:30, Maya practically ran to her car. She sat in the driver's seat for a full minute, breathing deeply, trying to calm the storm inside her chest. Her phone rang. The school. "Ms. Reyes, this is Principal Morrison. We need you to come pick up Emma. She's been in a fight." Maya's blood ran cold. "A fight? Is she hurt?" "She's fine, but we have a zero-tolerance policy. Can you come now?" Maya checked her watch. If she went to the school now, she'd be late for her hospital shift. If she was late, she could lose that job too. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. She drove to Cedar Falls Middle School with her heart pounding. Inside the main office, Emma sat in a chair, her arms crossed, a purple bruise forming on her cheek. Across from her sat Dylan Henderson, Dale and Patricia's son, with a bloody nose and a defiant expression. Principal Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s, gestured for Maya to sit. "Emma punched Dylan during lunch," she said without preamble. Maya looked at her daughter, Emma's eyes filled with tears. He said you were a loser. He said his dad said you're a failure and that's why you work at a diner. He said, her voice broke, he said soldiers are just people who couldn't get real jobs. Maya's entire world stopped. She looked at Dylan, then at Principal Morrison. And what's Dylan's punishment? Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Dylan will receive a warning. Emma threw the first punch, so she's suspended for 3 days. A warning? Maya's voice was dangerously quiet. He insults her mother, insults veterans, and he gets a warning. Ms. Reyes, I understand you're upset, but we have rules. And I understand that Dale Henderson donated the new gymnasium, Maya said, standing. Let me guess, that buys his son a free pass. Morrison's face flushed. That's not. Save it. Maya held out her hand to Emma. Come on, baby. As they walked out, Emma whispered, Mom, I'm sorry. Maya pulled her daughter close. Don't be sorry for defending yourself, ever. But as they drove home, Maya felt the walls closing in. She'd have to call the hospital and explain why she couldn't make her shift. She'd probably lose that job. Emma was suspended, which meant Maya would have to miss work at the diner to watch her, which meant less money, which meant they'd fall further behind. That night, after Emma was asleep, Maya sat at the kitchen table and looked at her bills. Rent due in 2 weeks, electric bill overdue, Emma's braces payment, car insurance. She opened her laptop and pulled up her bank account, $247. Maya put her head in her hands and, for the first time in months, let herself cry. But crying didn't pay bills, and weakness didn't solve problems. She wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and opened her email. There had to be something, another job, another opportunity, something she'd missed. And then she saw it, an email from her old commander, Colonel Patricia Warren. Subject line, opportunity, your skills needed. Maya's hand trembled as she clicked it open. Maya, I hope this email finds you well. I'm reaching out because I'm currently heading a specialized training program at Naval Special Warfare Command in Virginia Beach. We're developing new combat medicine protocols and need experienced medics to help train our personnel. The contract is 6 months, good pay, and your expertise would be invaluable. Interested, Colonel Warren. Maya read it 3 times. Virginia Beach was 2 hours away. She'd have to leave Emma with someone, but the pay, she scrolled down and saw the figure. The pay would solve everything. She glanced at the clock. 11, too late to call, but not too late to respond. Colonel Warren, I'm very interested. When can we talk? Maya Reyes. She hit send and sat back, a tiny flame of hope flickering in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. The interview with Colonel Warren happened over the phone 3 days later, while Emma was at school serving her suspension at home with Maya's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, watching her. Maya, I won't sugarcoat this, Colonel Warren said, her voice crisp and professional. This program is intense. You'd be training Navy SEALs, Marine Raiders, and other special operations personnel in advanced trauma care. The hours are brutal, the standards are unforgiving, and you'd be the only woman in a room full of alpha males who might not take kindly to being taught by an Army Reserve staff sergeant. Maya stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. Ma'am, with respect, I spent 2 years in Afghanistan teaching Special Forces medics. I can handle it. There was a pause, then a slight laugh. I know you can, that's why I'm offering you the position. But Maya, I need to know, are you ready to leave Cedar Falls for 6 months? Your file says you have a daughter. Maya looked out the window at the small town that had slowly been crushing her spirit. My daughter will understand, and honestly, Colonel, I need this, not just for the money, I need to remember who I am. Then the job is yours. Report to Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek on Monday. 0700 hours, don't be late. I won't be, ma'am, thank you. When Emma came home that afternoon, Maya sat her down at the kitchen table and explained everything. Her daughter listened quietly, her face cycling through emotions, surprise, worry, and finally understanding. 6 months is a long time, Mom, Emma said softly. I know, baby, but Aunt Rosa said you can stay with her and Uncle Mike. You'll be in the same school, same town, and I'll visit every weekend I can. Plus, we can video call every night. Emma nodded slowly. Rosa was Maya's older sister, stable and loving, with 2 kids of her own in the next town over. Will this make things better, money-wise, I mean? Maya's heart broke a little. 13-year-olds shouldn't have to worry about money. Yes, this will make things much better. Then you should do it, Mom. You've been so sad here. Emma reached across the table and took her mother's hand. I see it, even when you try to hide it. Maybe this will make you happy again. Maya pulled her daughter into a hug, blinking back tears. When did you get so wise? I have a pretty good teacher. The following Monday, Maya drove to Virginia Beach before dawn, her car packed with everything she'd need for the next 6 months. The Naval Amphibious Base sprawled across the coastline, a massive complex of buildings, training facilities, and piers where ships sat waiting for their next deployment. She checked in at the gate, received her temporary credentials, and followed the directions to Building 347, the Special Operations Medical Training Facility. Inside, she found Colonel Warren waiting in a conference room with 3 other people, 2 Navy commanders and a Marine Corps major. Staff Sergeant Reyes reporting as ordered, Maya said, standing at attention. Warren smiled. At ease, Maya. Gentlemen, this is the medic I was telling you about. 2 combat tour, Bronze Star, and more trauma saves than most surgeons see in a career. One of the Navy commanders, a hard-faced man named Briggs, looked skeptical. No offense, Colonel, but we're training Tier 1 operators. Is an Army Reserve Staff Sergeant really qualified for this? Maya met his gaze evenly. Sir, I kept a field hospital running during a sustained Taliban assault. I performed a needle decompression on a Marine with a collapsed lung using a pen when my equipment was destroyed. And I trained a Special Forces ODA team in tactical combat casualty care that they credited with saving lives during Operation Enduring Freedom. She paused. With respect, I'm exactly qualified for this. Briggs's eyebrow raised slightly, then he nodded. Fair enough, welcome aboard, Staff Sergeant. The training program started immediately. Maya's days began at 5 a.m. and ended well past dark. She taught classes on hemorrhage control, airway management, and combat trauma decision-making. She ran practical exercises where SEALs and Raiders practiced treating simulated casualties under fire. She pushed them, corrected them, and refused to accept anything less than perfection. And the men pushed back. You ever actually work on a SEAL, Staff Sergeant? One of them asked during her second week, his tone challenging. Or just Army guys? Maya didn't miss a beat. I worked on whoever was bleeding, petty officer, SEALs, Marines, Army, even a CIA contractor once. Blood all looks the same when it's leaving the body too fast. Some of them respected her immediately, others took longer. But Maya had learned long ago that respect in the military wasn't given, it was earned through competence, consistency, and the willingness to stand your ground. By the end of the first month, even the skeptics had come around. Maya's classes had the highest pass rates in the program. Her students were performing advanced medical procedures with confidence and precision. Colonel Warren pulled her aside one Friday and told her she was exceeding every expectation. For the first time in years, Maya felt like herself again. She video called Emma every night, heard about school and friends and how Uncle Mike was teaching her to play guitar. She sent money home to Rosa to help with expenses. And every Saturday morning, she drove the 2 hours back to Cedar Falls to spend the weekend with her daughter. But Cedar Falls hadn't changed. If anything, it had gotten worse. On her third weekend home, Maya stopped at the grocery store and ran into Patricia Henderson. Oh, Maya, Patricia said, her voice saccharine. I heard you got some kind of military job. Good for you. Dale was saying just the other day how it's never too late to turn your life around. Maya smiled tightly. It's going well, thank you. And Emma's staying with your sister? That must be hard being away from her. Patricia leaned in conspiratorially. You know, people are talking, wondering if it's right for a mother to leave her child like that, but I'm sure you know what you're doing. Maya felt her blood pressure rising, but she kept her voice calm. Emma's doing great. She understands that sometimes sacrifice is necessary for a better future. Of course, Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Well, good luck with everything. As Maya loaded groceries into her car, she saw Rick from the diner across the parking lot. He didn't acknowledge her, just got into his truck and drove away. She'd sent him a resignation email her first day at Little Creek. He'd never responded. That night, Maya and Emma made dinner together in Rosa's kitchen, and for a few hours, everything felt normal. But when Maya drove back to Virginia Beach on Sunday evening, the weight of Cedar Falls' judgment rode with her. 3 months into the program, everything changed. Maya was running a night training exercise, a simulated mass casualty event with smoke, noise, and actors playing wounded operators. Her students moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, triaging casualties, establishing treatment priorities, stabilizing the critical patients. She was monitoring their progress when Colonel Warren appeared at her elbow. Maya, we have a situation, can you step away for a moment? They walked to a quiet corner of the training facility. Warren's face was grave. There's been an incident. A SEAL team in Syria hit an IED, multiple casualties including their team medic. They're being evacuated to Landstuhl, but, Warren paused. The preliminary after-action report suggests the medic made critical errors before he was injured, errors that may have cost lives. Maya's stomach dropped. What kind of errors? Wrong medications administered, delayed treatment decisions, possible panic under fire. Warren met her eyes. Maya, the medic in question graduated from our program 2 years ago before you came on board, but SOCOM is already asking questions. They want to review our entire training curriculum. And some people are suggesting that maybe we need more experienced trainers, people with recent combat experience. But you brought me in specifically because of my combat experience, Maya said. I know, and you've been exceptional, but there are politics involved. Commander Briggs has some enemies in SOCOM who'd love to see this program shut down, and now they have ammunition, Warren sighed. I wanted you to hear it from me first. There's going to be an investigation. They'll review everything, our training methods, our standards, our personnel, including you. Maya felt the familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath her feet. Just when things were going well, just when she'd found her footing again, the rug was being pulled out. What do you need from me, ma'am? Keep doing what you're doing, keep training these men to the highest standard, and document everything. Every class, every exercise, every correction you make, we need to prove that our training is sound. Over the next 2 weeks, Maya worked harder than ever. She video recorded her classes. She created detailed lesson plans and assessment rubrics. She pushed her students even further, running them through scenario after scenario until they could perform life-saving procedures in their sleep. But the pressure was building. The investigation team arrived, 3 senior officers who observed classes, interviewed students, and reviewed every document in the program's files. Maya could feel their eyes on her constantly, assessing, judging, looking for weaknesses. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, Commander Briggs called her into his office. Staff Sergeant Reyes, sit down. Maya sat, her spine straight, her face neutral. Briggs shuffled papers on his desk. The investigation team has raised some concerns about you specifically. Sorry. They're questioning whether an Army Reserve Staff Sergeant has the qualifications to train Tier 1 operators. They're suggesting that we need active duty personnel, preferably from the Special Operations community itself. He looked up at her. I'm going to be honest with you, there are people who want you removed from this program. Maya's jaw tightened. With respect, sir, my performance speaks for itself. My students have the highest scores. I know that, and Colonel Warren knows that, but this isn't about performance anymore, it's about optics, about politics. Briggs leaned back in his chair. The medic who made those errors in Syria, he's claiming his training was inadequate. He's claiming we failed to prepare him for the realities of combat, and his lawyer is building a case. That's ridiculous. I've reviewed his training file. He passed every assessment. I know, but perception matters in this world. Briggs paused. I'm not making any decisions yet, but I wanted you to be prepared. This could go badly. Maya left his office feeling like she'd been punched in the gut. She walked outside into the cool evening air and stood there, breathing deeply, trying to process what she'd just heard. Her phone rang. Emma. Hey baby, Maya said, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. Mom, you sound weird, are you okay? Maya closed her eyes. Her daughter always could read her even over the phone. Just a long day, sweetie, how was school? They talked for 20 minutes about normal things, Emma's history project, her friend Sarah's birthday party, the new song she was learning on guitar. And for those 20 minutes, Maya could almost forget about the investigation, the politics, the threat hanging over her career. But after they hung up, reality came crashing back. Maya sat in her car in the parking lot and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her emails looking for something, anything that might help her case. And then she saw it, an email from 2 years ago when the medic in question had gone through the program. It was from the previous lead instructor, a Navy chief named Rodriguez. Trainee Petty Officer Jenkins is struggling with decision-making under pressure. Recommend additional training and close monitoring during field exercises. Concerns about his ability to handle high-stress situations. Maya's hands trembled as she read it. This medic had shown warning signs 2 years ago, warning signs that had apparently been ignored or minimized, and now people were trying to blame the current training program for his failures. She forwarded the email to Colonel Warren with a brief note, "Ma'am, you need to see this." The response came 5 minutes later, "My office now." Warren's office was in the main administrative building. Maya arrived to find not just the colonel but Commander Briggs and the head of the investigation team, a Navy captain named Morrison. Warren gestured to the email on her computer screen. "Where did you find this?" "I was reviewing old program files trying to document our training standards. It was buried in the archives." Captain Morrison leaned forward. "This email predates the current program structure. It's from when Chief Rodriguez was running things." "Exactly," Warren said, "which means the problems with Petty Officer Jenkins existed before Maya ever arrived, before our current curriculum. This isn't a training failure, this is a personnel selection failure." Briggs nodded slowly. "This changes things." "It should clear Staff Sergeant Reyes completely," Warren said firmly. But Morrison shook his head. "It helps, but the lawyers are still going to argue that the current program should have caught these issues, should have flagged Jenkins as high risk." He looked at Maya. "I'm sorry, Staff Sergeant, but you're not out of the woods yet." Maya drove back to her quarters that night feeling hollowed out. She'd found evidence that should have exonerated her, but it wasn't enough. The system was grinding forward and she was caught in its gears. She called Emma, but her daughter was at a friend's house and couldn't talk long. She called Rosa, but her sister was dealing with one of her own kids' crises and could only offer quick sympathy. Maya sat alone in her small room and felt the familiar weight of isolation settling over her shoulders. The next morning, everything fell apart. Maya arrived at the training facility to find Colonel Warren waiting for her, her face ashen. "Maya, I need you to come with me, now." They walked to the conference room where the investigation team had set up. Inside, Captain Morrison sat with 2 other officers Maya didn't recognize. "Staff Sergeant Reyes," Morrison said, "we've received new information. Petty Officer Jenkins's lawyer has provided sworn testimony from 3 other SEAL medics who went through the program. They're claiming the training was rushed, inadequate, and that safety protocols were ignored." Maya's blood ran cold. "That's not true." "They're also claiming," Morrison continued, "that you specifically showed bias against SEAL personnel, that you made disparaging comments about their abilities and created a hostile training environment." "What?" Maya's voice rose. "I never." "One of them claims you told him, and I quote, 'SEALs think they're invincible until they're bleeding out.' Do you remember saying that?" Maya's mind raced. Yes, but it wasn't. It was a teaching point about overconfidence in the field, about the importance of realistic threat assessment. I wasn't disparaging anyone." Morrison looked unmoved. "The context may not matter to a court-martial board." The word hung in the air like a bomb. Court-martial. Colonel Warren stood abruptly. "Captain, this is absurd. You're going to convene a court-martial based on twisted interpretations of teaching moments." "I'm not convening anything yet, but SOCOM Legal is pushing hard. They want someone to take responsibility for what happened in Syria." Morrison looked at Maya with something almost like sympathy. "And right now, Staff Sergeant Reyes is the most convenient target." Maya felt the room spinning. A court-martial would end her military career. It would destroy any chance of future employment in the defense sector. It would humiliate her, brand her as incompetent or negligent. It would prove everyone in Cedar Falls right about her. "I need to speak with Staff Sergeant Reyes privately," Warren said, her voice hard as steel. Morrison nodded and left with his team. When they were alone, Warren turned to Maya. "This is a witch hunt, pure and simple. They need a scapegoat and you're it. So what do I do?" "You fight, you document everything, you find witnesses who'll testify to your competence, and you don't give up." Warren paused. "But Maya, I need you to know this could get worse before it gets better. Are you prepared for that?" Maya thought about Emma, about the bills finally getting paid, about the sense of purpose she'd rediscovered here, about everything she stood to lose. I don't have a choice, ma'am. I'm already at rock bottom. The only way out is through. Over the next week, Maya lived in a state of constant anxiety. She taught her classes with cameras rolling, every word documented. She submitted written statements defending her teaching methods. She reached out to former students asking if any would be willing to testify on her behalf. Some responded immediately with support, others didn't respond at all, and a few sent messages that made it clear they wanted nothing to do with the controversy. Through it all, Maya kept calling Emma every night. She didn't tell her daughter about the investigation. There was no point worrying a 13-year-old about things beyond her control, but Emma could sense something was wrong. "Mom, when are you coming home for good?" she asked one night. "The contract ends in 3 months, baby, then I'll be home." "But you sound so tired, maybe you should come home early." Maya closed her eyes. "I can't, Em, I have to see this through." "Why, if it's making you unhappy?" "Because running away doesn't solve anything, because sometimes you have to stand and fight even when it's hard." Maya paused. "I'm teaching you something important right now, even if you can't see it. I'm teaching you not to quit." There was silence on the line. Then Emma said softly, "I'm proud of you, Mom." Maya had to mute her phone for a moment to compose herself. That weekend, she couldn't make it home to Cedar Falls. The investigation team had scheduled more interviews. She called Emma to apologize and her daughter said she understood, but Maya could hear the disappointment in her voice. On Monday morning, Maya was called to Commander Briggs's office again. This time, Colonel Warren was already there, along with Captain Morrison and a JAG officer Maya hadn't met before. "Staff Sergeant Reyes," the JAG officer said, "I'm Lieutenant Commander Pearson. I've been assigned to advise you regarding the investigation." Maya's heart sank. They were assigning her a lawyer. This was serious. Pearson continued, "After reviewing all the evidence, SOCOM has decided to proceed with an Article 15 proceeding." An Article 15 was non-judicial punishment, serious but not a court-martial. Maya felt a tiny spark of relief. "However," Pearson said, "the charges are significant: dereliction of duty, conduct unbecoming. If the Article 15 is sustained, you'll likely face reduction in rank, loss of pay, and termination from this program." Maya's hands gripped the arms of her chair. "What about the evidence showing Jenkins had problems before I ever arrived?" The email from Chief Rodriguez. "It's been reviewed and noted, but it doesn't absolve the current program of responsibility." Morrison's face was sympathetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Staff Sergeant, but this is moving forward." The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. Maya would have that time to prepare her defense, to gather witnesses to build her case. She left the office feeling like she was drowning. Colonel Warren walked with her. "Maya, I'm going to testify on your behalf, so is Commander Briggs. We'll fight this. Will it be enough?" Warren didn't answer right away. "I don't know, but we'll try." That night, Maya sat in her quarters and stared at the wall. She thought about quitting, about withdrawing from the program, accepting whatever punishment they wanted to give her, and just going home to Emma. But then she thought about Dale Henderson's smug face, about Rick at the diner calling her soldier girl like it was an insult, about Principal Morrison letting Dylan Henderson off with a warning while Emma got suspended. She thought about every person who'd underestimated her, dismissed her, assumed she was weak or broken or less than. And something hardened in her chest. She wasn't going to quit. She wasn't going to make it easy for them. Maya spent the next 2 weeks building her defense like she was planning a military operation. She reviewed every training record. She contacted every student she'd taught and asked them to provide written statements about the quality of her instruction. She documented her qualifications, her combat experience, her teaching methodology. And slowly, something began to emerge. The 3 SEAL medics who'd made complaints against her, Maya discovered they'd all failed her initial assessments and had to repeat portions of the training. They'd shown up late to classes, cut corners during practical exercises, and resented being corrected by an Army staff sergeant. Their complaints weren't about her competence, they were about their egos. Maya compiled everything into a thick folder and gave it to Lieutenant Commander Pearson. This is good, Pearson said, reviewing the documents. This shows a pattern of personal animosity, not legitimate training concerns. But Maya, you need to understand Article 15 hearings aren't courts of law. The commanding officer has broad discretion. Evidence matters, but so does perception. Whose perception? The perception of the senior leadership, the perception that something went wrong in Syria and someone needs to be held accountable. Pearson met her eyes. Sometimes the truth isn't enough. The night before the hearing, Maya called Emma. Her daughter answered on the second ring. Mom, I miss you. When are you coming home? Soon, baby. Listen, I want to tell you something important. Okay. Maya took a deep breath. Tomorrow I have a big meeting about my job and it might not go well, but no matter what happens, I need you to know I did the right thing, I did my best, and sometimes that's all you can do. There was a pause. Mom, are you in trouble? Kind of, but it's complicated, and it's not fair, but I'm going to handle it. You always do, Emma said softly. You're the strongest person I know. Yeah. Maya's eyes stung with tears. I love you so much. I love you too, Mom, and hey, remember what you always tell me, don't let them see you cry. Maya laughed through her tears. That's right, don't let them see you cry. The next morning, Maya put on her dress uniform, made sure every ribbon and badge was perfectly placed, and walked into the hearing with her head high. The presiding officer was a Navy captain named Edwards, a stern-faced man in his 50s who'd commanded SEAL teams in Iraq. Also present were Colonel Warren, Commander Briggs, Captain Morrison, Lieutenant Commander Pearson, and the 3 SEAL medics who'd filed complaints. For 2 hours, Maya sat silently while people argued about her competence, her judgment, her character. She listened to the 3 SEALs describe her as arrogant, biased, and incompetent. She listened to Morrison lay out the case against her. Then it was her turn. Maya stood, looked Captain Edwards directly in the eyes, and began to speak. Sir, I've been a combat medic for 12 years. I've served in the most dangerous places on Earth. I've saved lives under fire, trained hundreds of soldiers, and earned the respect of every unit I've served with. I came to this program because Colonel Warren asked me to bring my experience to the next generation of special operations medics. She paused, her voice steady and strong. The 3 petty officers who filed complaints against me, they're not angry because I'm a bad instructor. They're angry because I held them to the same standard I held everyone else, because I didn't give them special treatment, because I expected them to earn their qualifications through hard work and competence, not just because they're SEALs. One of the petty officers started to protest, but Edwards silenced him with a look. Maya continued, Petty Officer Jenkins made mistakes in Syria, terrible mistakes that cost lives, but those mistakes weren't caused by my training. They were caused by problems that existed long before I arrived, problems documented by Chief Rodriguez 2 years ago, problems that the command chose to ignore. She pulled out a stack of papers and handed them to Edwards. These are statements from 42 of my students, 42 special operations personnel who went through my training and are now serving around the world. They describe my instruction as thorough, demanding, and potentially life-saving. Several of them credit skills they learned in my classes with successful trauma interventions in combat. Edwards flipped through the statements, his expression unreadable. I understand that someone wants accountability for what happened in Syria, Maya said quietly. I understand the need to review our training and make sure we're preparing these men for the worst, but making me a scapegoat won't bring back the lives lost. It won't fix the real problems in the system. It'll just be easier than admitting that sometimes, despite our best efforts, people make mistakes under fire. She stood at attention. I've given everything to this program, my time, my expertise, my dedication. I believe in this mission, and if you decide to punish me anyway, I'll accept it. But I won't accept that I failed these men because the evidence shows otherwise. Maya sat down, her heart pounding, and waited. Captain Edwards was silent for a long moment, then he looked at Morrison. Captain, you've reviewed all this evidence. Yes, sir. And you still believe Staff Sergeant Reyes bears responsibility for the failures in Syria? Morrison hesitated. Sir, I believe the situation is more complex than initially presented. Edwards turned to the 3 SEAL medics. Petty officers, you've heard Staff Sergeant Reyes' defense. Do you have anything to add? The first one shifted uncomfortably. Sir, we just felt like she didn't understand how we operate. Did she teach you incorrect medical procedures? No, sir. Did she fail to cover essential material? No, sir, but did she show actual bias in her grading or treatment of you? The petty officer looked down. No, sir. Edwards closed the folder in front of him. I'll review all the evidence and render a decision within 48 hours. This hearing is adjourned. Everyone stood as Edwards left the room. Maya felt Colonel Warren's hand on her shoulder. You did well, Warren said quietly. But Maya couldn't tell if it had been enough. The next 48 hours were the longest of Maya's life. She continued teaching her classes, going through the motions while her future hung in the balance. She called Emma and tried to sound upbeat. She lay awake at night running through the hearing over and over in her mind. On the second day, at 1700 hours, she was summoned to Captain Edwards's office. Colonel Warren and Commander Briggs were already there. Edwards sat behind his desk, his face grave. Staff Sergeant Reyes, I've reviewed all the evidence, all the testimony, and all the relevant regulations. This is my decision. Maya stood at attention, every muscle in her body tense. The charges of dereliction of duty and conduct unbecoming are dismissed. Maya's knees almost buckled with relief, but Edwards wasn't done. However, I am issuing a formal letter of counseling regarding communication with students. While I found no evidence of actual bias or incompetence, I do believe that as an instructor, you need to be more mindful of how your words might be interpreted. A letter of counseling wasn't punishment, it was a warning. It would go in her file, but it wouldn't affect her rank or pay. Furthermore, Edwards said, I'm recommending that SOCOM conduct a thorough review of personnel selection criteria for Special Operations medics. The evidence clearly shows that Petty Officer Jenkins should never have been cleared for deployment. That's a systemic failure, not a training failure. He stood and extended his hand. You're a credit to your service, Staff Sergeant Reyes. Don't let this process make you doubt that. Maya shook his hand, too overwhelmed to speak. Outside, Colonel Warren pulled her into a quick hug. You did it, you fought and you won. I didn't feel like I won, Maya said, her voice shaking. That's because you have integrity, Warren replied. People with integrity never feel good about having to defend themselves from false accusations, but you stood your ground and the truth prevailed. That's a win. That night, Maya video called Emma and told her everything. Her daughter listened with wide eyes, then said, Mom, you're like a superhero. Maya laughed, I'm just a mom who wouldn't give up. That's what makes you a superhero. The final 3 months of Maya's contract passed quickly. With the investigation behind her, she threw herself into training with renewed purpose. Her classes became even better, her students even more skilled. Word spread through the special operations community about the Army staff sergeant who'd stood up to false accusations and won. On her last day, the entire training company assembled in the main classroom. Colonel Warren stood at the front with a small wooden plaque. Staff Sergeant Reyes has completed her contract with distinction, Warren announced. Her students have the highest qualification rates in the history of this program. Several of her innovations have been incorporated into our permanent curriculum, and her integrity under pressure has set an example for everyone in this command. Warren handed Maya the plaque. It read, in recognition of exceptional service and unwavering dedication to excellence in special operations medical training. As Maya looked at the faces of the men she'd trained, hard, capable men who'd learned from her and respected her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. That weekend, Maya packed up her belongings and drove home to Cedar Falls for the last time. Emma was waiting on the front porch of Rosa's house and she ran to the car as Maya pulled up. Mom, you're really home. They hugged for a long time and Maya breathed in the scent of her daughter's shampoo and felt the weight of 6 months apart melting away. I'm really home, baby. Over the next week, Maya moved herself and Emma back into their little house on Maple Street. She still had bills to pay, still needed work, but the money from the contract had given her breathing room. She could afford to be selective, to find something that honored her skills and experience. On her first Saturday back, she took Emma to the diner for breakfast, not Bernie's but the other diner in town, Mary's Place. They were sitting in a booth, laughing over pancakes when the door opened and a group of men walked in. Navy SEALs, in civilian clothes but unmistakable in their bearing. The leader spotted Maya and walked over to their table. Staff Sergeant Reyes. Maya looked up confused. Yes. Ma'am, we just finished a training exercise at Little Creek. Colonel Warren told us you'd moved back to this area. He extended his hand. I'm Lieutenant Morrison, I was one of your students. Maya shook his hand, recognition dawning. Lieutenant Morrison, yes, how are you? Outstanding, ma'am. Thanks to your training, my team successfully treated 3 casualties in Yemen last month. Everyone survived. I wanted to thank you in person. The other SEALs nodded in agreement. Emma stared at them with wide eyes. That's wonderful, Maya said, her voice thick with emotion. I'm so glad. We heard about the investigation, Morrison said quietly. We all submitted statements on your behalf. I hope they helped. They did more than you know. Morrison nodded. Well, we won't interrupt your breakfast, but I wanted you to know you're the best instructor I've ever had, bar none. He glanced at Emma. You should be very proud of your mom. I am, Emma said firmly. As the SEALs walked to their own table, Maya noticed people in the diner watching, listening. She saw Dale Henderson's wife Patricia in a corner booth, her mouth slightly open in surprise. She saw Rick from Bernie's diner at the counter, his expression unreadable. And she saw something else: respect, curiosity, a shift in the atmosphere. Over the following days, word spread through Cedar Falls. The Army veteran who'd been working at the diner, whom people had gossiped about and pitied, had been training Navy SEALs, had fought off false accusations, had been recognized for excellence. Maya's phone started ringing with job offers. The local hospital wanted her for their emergency department. A private medical training company offered her a consulting position. The county emergency services asked if she'd train their paramedics. She chose the hospital job, better hours, good pay, work that mattered. On her first day, she wore her scrubs with the same pride she'd once worn her uniform. She saved a life in her first week, a car accident victim who came in with internal bleeding. The attending physician told her she'd made the difference between life and death. Emma thrived, her grades improved, her confidence grew. She started talking about becoming a doctor someday, inspired by her mother's work. And slowly, Maya rebuilt her life into something strong and stable and good. 3 months after returning home, Maya was working the late shift at the hospital when the emergency department doors burst open. A dozen men in tactical gear rushed in, carrying a colleague on a stretcher. Maya's training kicked in immediately. She assessed the patient, gunshot wound to the chest, significant blood loss, and began barking orders to the trauma team. For 20 minutes, they worked with precision and speed, stabilizing the patient, controlling the hemorrhage, preparing him for surgery. When the patient was finally wheeled to the OR, Maya stepped back and saw who had brought him in. Navy SEALs, a different team from the one she'd met at the diner, but they had the same look, the same bearing. Their team leader approached her. Ma'am, are you Staff Sergeant Maya Reyes? I am, Maya said, pulling off her bloody gloves. Ma'am, we were doing a training exercise nearby when our teammate had an accidental discharge. We brought him here because this was the closest hospital. He paused. We didn't know you worked here, but our command will be glad to know he's in good hands. Maya felt a swell of pride. He's in good hands, he's stable and heading to surgery, he'll make it. The SEAL nodded, relief flooding his face. Thank you, ma'am. As they filed out to the waiting room, Maya heard one of them say to another, Dude, that's her, the instructor who got railroaded and then cleared. Edwards wrote a whole memo about how the investigation was bogus. Maya smiled and went to scrub up for her next patient. 6 months later, Maya was asked to speak at Cedar Falls High School's Veterans Day Assembly. She stood in front of 500 students, teachers, and community members, including Emma, who sat in the front row beaming with pride. I learned something important over the past year, Maya said, her voice carrying through the gymnasium. I learned that strength isn't about never falling down, it's about getting back up. It's about standing for the truth even when it's hard. It's about refusing to let other people's doubts define who you are. She looked at Emma. I learned it from the soldiers I served with, I learned it from the sailors I trained, but mostly I learned it from my daughter, who never stopped believing in me even when I almost stopped believing in myself. After the assembly, people lined up to thank her, teachers, students, veterans. Dale Henderson approached, his wife Patricia beside him. He looked uncomfortable. "Staff Sergeant Reyes," he said, "I owe you an apology. I said some things about you that were unfair. I made assumptions. I was wrong." Maya looked at him for a long moment. She could have enjoyed this moment, could have made him squirm, but that wasn't who she was. "Apology accepted, Mr. Henderson. We all make mistakes." Patricia touched Maya's arm. "Your daughter is a credit to you. We're honored to have you in our community." As they walked away, Emma came up beside her mother. "You let him off easy," she said. Maya smiled. "Forgiveness isn't about letting people off easy. It's about not letting their mistakes weigh you down anymore." That evening, Maya and Emma sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. The house was paid current on rent. The bills were under control. Emma's braces were almost done. But more than that, Maya had something she hadn't had in a long time. "Peace, Mom," Emma said softly. "Yeah, baby. I'm glad you didn't give up." Maya pulled her daughter close. "Me too." In the distance, she could hear the sounds of Cedar Falls settling in for the night. The same small town where people had once doubted her, dismissed her, underestimated her. The same small town where she'd proven them wrong, not through anger or revenge, but through quiet strength, unwavering competence, and the refusal to be broken. Maya Reyes had been tested by fire, and she'd emerged stronger. Not because she was fearless, but because she'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to keep going despite it. Her shift was over, but her story, the story of a woman who'd served her country, raised her daughter, fought for justice, and reclaimed her dignity, that story was just beginning. And somewhere, in training facilities across the country, the men and women she'd taught were saving lives, using the skills and the strength she'd given them. That was her legacy, not the doubts others had placed on her, not the obstacles they'd thrown in her path, but the lives she'd touched, the people she'd taught, and the example she'd set. Strength isn't given, it's forged, and Maya Reyes had been forged in the fires of doubt and emerged as steel.